Do you see
Hey,
it?
we're recording. Yeah.
We are officially recording, and
we're recording officially episode number whatever it is.
I think we're on number 8.
Cool. All right.
Yeah. We've recorded almost as many as Meghan and Harry recorded before they got fired from Spotify.
Who's this? Sorry.
Just Prince Harry.
The British royal. Sorry, I'm just.
Yeah. I'm only laughing because earlier today. Where did we?
I was thinking like you might be talking about some locals who were doing another show, and I was like, "Who's this? I haven't heard of their show. They got banned from Spotify. What?"
Yeah, Spotify canned him. They gave him a $20 million deal to do some podcasts, and then I guess they didn't realize that to do podcasts you actually had to work, and that it takes effort, and so they only did like 10 podcasts over a year period, and Spotify referred to them as effing grifters.
And I think that just I think like the word royal and the word grifter probably are synonyms. That's the Irish in me.
Yeah. Well, everybody, if you don't know, this is Geddry and Jurich, and I'm Mary Geddry. This is
I'm Israel
and we are going to talk about sustainability today. This is more specifically buzzword. More specifically, sustainability in Coos County and just what that might look at. So I want to start by just giving a very general definition of sustainability. And to me, sustainability basically is meeting the needs of the present without stealing from future generations. And unfortunately, previous generations in Coos County did not heed that tenet. So Coos County, okay. The other thing, you cannot talk about sustainability unless you also talk about capitalism, because capitalism is simply unsustainable. And then you also have to recognize, and this is hard, but effectively in the United States, based upon our system of laws, sustainability is illegal. And that's a hard concept for people to grasp at times. But because we cannot say no to unsustainable development, because it's that decision making is taken out of the local arena, and it's made a part of the Commerce Clause and local regulating agencies or federal, state regulating agencies. It is in effect illegal to be sustainable. And so looking at those 3 things, I want to do a very brief history on. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I want to, you're going to do a brief history, but on the illegality of sustainability, I want to clarify, are you saying that it's illegal for the state to regulate sustainable practices, or is it illegal for like corporations and businesses to just voluntarily be sustainable? Because I'm just guessing here because I haven't looked at the structure of our legal code like you have, but I'm guessing that corporations and businesses could voluntarily, if they wanted to, if they were less interested in profit, could voluntarily be sustainable and wouldn't be in violation of the law. But I'm guessing that the state is constrained from oversight and regulation that forces businesses and corporations to actually engage in those practices. Is that accurate, or is it or am I missing it?
What it really means is that a community like Coos County, Coos Bay,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have the right to say no to harmful, non-sustainable development because that's regulated by the Commerce Clause, basically.
Okay. So how were
And
we
so
able to how were we able to defeat Jordan Cove then? Was it not the local community that did that, or was it a different structure? Sorry,
well,
I'm gonna get. Let's
yeah.
go back into the history of it before we get into that issue.
Well, let's finish with Jordan Cove. First of all, we did not defeat Jordan Cove. The market defeated Jordan Cove. Now, there was a whole lot of effort and a lot of work complying with the playground that we're allowed to play in, which is filing comments, getting, state and local, federal permits. But Jordan Cove was approved by FERC. It didn't get a state permit, but it also stopped trying, and it stopped trying primarily because of the market.
Okay.
So I don't mean to diminish all the hard work and the mountains of comments that people filed and all of that, but Jordan Cove wasn't defeated by anything other than the market.
Okay. All right.
Unfortunate.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. I was
okay.
not sure what you meant. I have a better idea.
So that is the gist of what I'm saying when you say sustainability is illegal. Jordan Cove would eventually have gotten a state permit. It would have had to have made some concessions. It would have had to do this, X, Y, Z. It would have still gotten a state permit, and it would have been able to break ground, take people's property using eminent domain, do a 230 odd mile pipeline between here and Malin, Oregon, and with little leaky things all over it. And it would have been able to do all that. And the funny thing about it, originally it was going to be an import. And then they changed it to become an export. And then they said, oh, this is so great. We could be an import and an export. Now, think about that. Like, just, let's take blood out of this arm and then we'll go back and put it in over here, And so,
all right. Sorry, I took you off of the history. You were going to get into the history, and I kind of took you off with my questions and comments. So I'm hoping I can steer you back there so I can learn more.
Okay. So in a nutshell, Coos County is 1 million square acres. 670,000 of those acres are timber, and primarily large tract timber, which means that they are governed and taxed accordingly. Small tract timber is actually for small, anything less than 5,000 acres actually gets charged more. So the county is primarily a monoculture in those 670,000 acres. And they're governed under the Oregon Forest Practices Act. And the consequence of that is that the environmental protections are minimal at best. There's almost no riparian setback, for example. They spray, with abandon. I've never confirmed this, but I've been told by more than one source that Coos County is one of the most sprayed counties in Oregon, and that it is, and that we have very high levels of cancer, various different kinds of cancer. So I hesitate.
What other environmental impacts are affected by spraying?
Well, fish. It gets into the waterways. when you have a monoculture, you don't have, a forest, a real true forest is a community. There's a huge symbiotic relationship between the ferns and the mushrooms and the small trees and the conifers and etc. We don't have that anymore.
We have
2/3.
agricultural fields.
We have tree farms. That's
Yeah,
what we have.
that's what I was saying. They're agricultural.
And so, and then one of the problems that the county is having now, and Rod Taylor is getting hit with this in the face, is that
Of course, face.
is that the tax base, that 670 odd thousand acres, is taxed at a very minimal rate, very favorable to the large tract timber owners, who primarily or almost exclusively don't even live in Coos County. They are owned now by real estate investment trusts, and their whole business model is different, and they pay a minimum salary. So you could have an acre of land with $250,000 worth of trees on it, and they pay $400 a month or a year in taxes. So the county services are going up in costs. We spend approximately $130 million a year in Coos County to provide services to everybody, from roads to public safety to
Wait,
Coos
wait,
Health.
we provide roads? Are you sure?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I'm just commenting on the condition of my roads.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, so and we're no longer able to provide those services at the level that everybody wants, because we aren't bringing in enough income, and because the Oregon legislature has succumbed to lobbyists and so forth, and has agreed, there's no severance tax, for example. There used to be a harvest tax, but that only goes to support the state. It doesn't support the local taxing districts. And yet those big logging trucks come by and use our roads and do all that stuff all the time, tear everything up. But they don't, the Wall Street hedge funds that own most of the tree property in the area, they're gone. They're just out they're not even here. So, and we barely mill anything locally anymore either. So none of that is sustainable. Not here. For the people that live here, that live in this little triangle, the system that we have is not sustainable. So now Rod Taylor thinks all we need to do is go and cut down one of the remaining old growth forests in the area, which is the Coos Bay Wagon Road land, and that we will be flush. And my friend David Jennings pointed out, he said, well, that would be one less feeding frenzy, and you might create a few jobs for a season or two, but at $130 million a year, it is one less feeding frenzy. So
yeah, it doesn't sound like expanding the places you can harvest are necessarily the solution, because the structure of the system is funneling wealth and value elsewhere anyway. So you could potentially, I'm theorizing again, I haven't examined this at all, I'm just theorizing, you could potentially, using the existing products, expand how much income you got from those by making sure more of that, the value of those products stayed here locally, by paying logging workers more money. So increasing their income would keep more of that money locally, and then taxing more would keep more of that locally, if the county actually has the authority to tax it. If not, then you have to
Unfortunately,
go to the
state,
state and then require the
yeah,
state to give the county more of the money that comes out of that industry. So I would think that if you could do that, you might reduce the incentive of some of these firms to actually do their harvesting here. But then they're just going to be sitting on land that they have to pay taxes on, but actually aren't generating wealth on. So, so if you were to say, tax the property and then also tax the product, but make the use of the product incentivized by reducing how much they'd be paying on property if they were actively, selling, harvesting product and selling it. I don't know. You might be able to
well,
create a system that does create more wealth locally, but then what happens with the environmental impact with that?
so one of the things, in fact, I spoke briefly with Commissioner John Sweet, and he said, the rural counties in Oregon are really dependent on resources.
Right.
And what they're really dependent on is resource extraction.
Exactly.
So unfortunately, we don't value forests unless we cut them down and turn them into 2x4s and cell phones and stuff like that. So there's that whole mindset that you have to contend with. Now, the taxation side of it, we could probably do 2 hours on that, and I'm not. It's worth it, but I don't want to go there today.
That's fine. That's fine.
But I think that people have to stop. The county only has so many resources, and they've already been over extracted, and the environmental impact is pretty severe. I was told when I moved here in 2003, and I went to a meeting about the Coos watershed one day, and I was told during this meeting that the Coquille River once ran blue. It was blue, and you could take a deep draft ship all the way from Bandon to Powers. Now, of course, it's definitely not blue. It's brown, and you can't see, a foot into it. And it is, and part of that was because they had ships coming up, and there were all these hardwoods on the bank, which is where hardwoods grow, and it held the banks together and grew and so, but those hardwoods were so convenient to use as firewood for their steam engines, to fuel their steam engines. And so the whole lay of the land has been altered significantly. I also understand that there were trees that ran all the way to the ocean's edge, and of course, we don't see any of that anymore. So there's always going to be some environmental impact. And I guess, if you think about it from a sustainable point of view, you want to be able to balance that impact in some way that's efficient and provides for the needs of the present, but doesn't cost future generations like it's costing us now. We're paying now for the largesse and abandon of, even one generation ago, 2 generations ago. And so to think about sustainability, you have to first, I think, analyze capitalism in and of itself.
I mean, it sounds like one of the issues here that we have with our, dependence on extractive resources is that we've got, foreign, and I'm going to say foreign in a broad sense, not not in a national sense, I'm going to say anything out of county. We have investment from out of the county that expect a return on their investment. And that, that includes property ownership from out of county. So these massive investment firms that own these lands, and they expect a return on that investment. Their interest isn't necessarily the needs and well-being and economic success of the people who live here, let alone the viability of the ecology here. They're not interested in any of that. They want a return on their investment. That means they're interested in profits and money. If their interests were not involved, if they couldn't do that. If we just focused on the economic well-being of the people here and the ecological well-being of the natural world here, and we're not at all interested in giving them a return on their investment, then we would have a lot more to work with, right? Like
obviously, yeah.
In terms of value, in terms of the people to be able, like, so I think in some respect, like encouraging local ownership of lands, I don't even know how that's possible, because I imagine the value of the lands would be somewhat prohibitive for local ownership to acquire it, with the possible exception of maybe the tribes and maybe some other local entities
or a consortium of people get together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it sounds like local ownership might be an option or an alternative to try to incentivize and encourage, to draw some of that investment interest away from outside investors and into like people who are going to sustain the local economy and preserve the local ecology.
So basically, Coos County has a severe trade imbalance. We import way more than we export. A lot of that's energy, just getting power here. Is a big part of it. And I used to know those numbers off the top of my head, but I'm sure they've changed, and I haven't looked at them for 5 or 6 years, but I don't think it's changed significantly. But anyway, we have a huge trade imbalance, and because we import things, food, power, we don't, that money that we spend is immediately exported out of the area to, improve somewhere else. It doesn't stay. So part of sustainability is figuring out a way to provide for ourselves, not just like literally like food, water, shelter, and so forth. The kind of joke, if you can call it that, is if the big one hits, the big Cascadia thing, we will literally be cut off. And there's not enough arable land here to grow enough food to feed the population that we currently have, supposedly. And and water, by the way, clean water. So those are things that if we were to start having discussions about how to make Coos County sustainable, it would be, how do we keep money here instead of exporting it out of the area? How do we reinvest here? And how, especially in the case of a catastrophe, how do we actually take care of ourselves? And without importing all of these goods and services from somewhere else. And the AIA put together a group called the Sustainable Design Assessment Team a few years ago. And they came and they did this big assessment. We got a grant for them to come and do it. And we referred to it as the SDAT report. And it was actually, it didn't offer any solutions, but it talked about, because you have to have that conversation. we all have to come together and say, okay, how do we import less electricity? How do we, how do we import less fuel? How do we, grow more food locally? And even that's not always legal, because there are valid FDA regulations about where you
Are there
get your
invalid
food.
ones? Are there? I mean, because here's the thing about, like, okay, I grew up in rural Oregon, and as much as I have, like, the the education and the understanding of economic systems to be, quite anti-capitalist and, quite leftist, I do recognize that, regulations don't, the one size fits all regulatory structure doesn't always
Yeah,
work, and especially,
right.
when regulations are coming from outside of the community, outside the, you can get regulations that are, they might have a solid reason for why they have the regulations, and they might actually work and be valid in some kind of settings and areas, and then in others you're like, wait a minute, that regulation isn't actually serving. So I wonder, are there regulatory structures that are actually an impediment to sustainability here, in
So
not including the regulatory structures that you're discussing that actively ban us from being able to impose sustainable systems, to make
so
sustainability illegal.
so the one size fits all thing is a huge detriment to any form of sustainability. But you have to recognize that those regulatory agencies are funded less by tax dollars than they are more by um, application fees from the industry that they are meant to regulate. The energy industry is a perfect example. FERC survives based on, FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. FERC survives based on the fact that, Sabine Pass LNG and, XYZ nuclear power plant apply to them. They pay exorbitant fees, and then they go through the whole permitting process. They help draft and craft the regulations under which they are supposed to act under. And those regulatory agencies, FDA, any of them, are not there to ever, they're not designed or created or built to ever say no. They are there to impose restrictions to meet certain standards. Now, the biggest problem and the biggest detriment to sustainability in this country is that environmental standards, for example, there's no zero tolerance ever. They come up with, and they say, we are allowed to pollute by X number of parts per billion, with whatever pollutant that we want. There is no zero standard ever. So communities are not allowed to protect themselves to a higher standard than the federal and state regulatory agencies allow. You're familiar with Dillon's rule?
Nope.
Dillon's rule basically says that the feds are the father or the parent of the state, and the state is the parent of the community. The state
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
incorporates, okay. The state incorporates a community, and it, by doing so, giving it a charter to exist, you comply with all of these rules. And so the biggest issue, again, is we the individual, we the community, don't get to say, I don't want any hexavalent chromium. I don't even want 1 part per billion of hexavalent chromium or whatever it is, toluene or something. We're not allowed to say that because the regulatory agencies have gotten this up. Then the real kicker is the industry. You can't sue the industry when you get sick because they have a government permit to poison you. And so that is a big part of the problem. And that's why some people are now like they're giving granting personhood to certain rivers, ecosystems, that this river has a right to thrive and not be polluted and so forth. And a lot of people have an issue with that. Like, they think if they own 100,000 acres, that they can do whatever they want to it, destroy any ecosystem that's there, spray it with whatever they want. Even though, as we know, the Oregon Forest Practices Act has so little riparian setback that it almost all gets into the water, and all that water comes and we drink it. I use a Berkey filter.
So it sounds like what you're describing is you have a regulatory state that nobody on the right really likes the regulatory state. And we, at the same time, those of us on the left are like, wait a minute, this regulatory state isn't in our interest either. And we dislike it for different reasons. Generally, the right is maybe unwittingly following in the interests of the industry, the market. The regulatory state is actually serving the interests of the industry and the market, and not in the interest of the public or the individual.
That's exactly right.
And I think what we saw an example of this, and I'm not saying that the carbon credit structure that what the Oregon state legislature was suggesting was an ideal model, but we saw with the rise of timber unity, you saw a lot of local timber workers and people connected to that industry organized in opposition to climate change mitigating legislation that actually served this industry that is not serving the interests of these workers. And so I thought of, I had a pretty cynical perspective on timber unity because I saw who was funding it, and I was thinking, when it comes down to sustainability, when it comes down to how we regulate these industries, and how we create economic viability for the people that live in communities like ours, without destroying the ecology of the world around us and the global ecosystems as well, our entire climate, the people that end up bearing the brunt of the costs of sustainability, right? If we start limiting the capacity for businesses to extract resources with abandon, the people who bear the cost for that tend to be the local workers, the working class folks, because those executives and those Wall Street investors, they might see a smaller return on the investment, but they're going to redirect wealth their way. They're just going to cut pay. They're going to cut jobs. They're not going to actually they're not going to accept losses. The system isn't designed for them to accept losses. It's designed to constantly grow. And that's what their priority and interest is. That's what the industry priority and interest is grow your investment. It's not pay your workers more. It's not make sure that the community those workers live in has decent roads and decent schools and has the money to and the ability to survive if there was a disaster or something like that. That isn't their interest at all. So, and that was one of the things that was frustrating about seeing timber unity organize against these kinds of regulations is, they had. I understand the concerns of the working class folks that were organizing. They don't want to bear the brunt and the cost of these kinds of changes that the industry imposes on them because it won't accept losses. And so they organize against the legislation instead of organizing against this industry and this structure that doesn't serve their interests.
Right.
And that's frustrating. It's frustrating because I think those of us on the left, we want to fight for the working class. We want to fight for people to have, a better standard of living, a better economy. And we're up against these investment systems that really don't care about the local communities. But what we also are we're at the same time trying to create regulations and structures that protect the natural world. And we're kind of torn to two different directions. We want to protect the natural world, but we don't want the cost of that protection to fall on the working class people. But we've got this system that's automatically going to force it to happen that way. If you get an environmental regulation through the legislator, the people who bear the cost are the working class folks. If you get and then if you don't get that through, and you get environmental and ecological damage, the people who bear the cost are the working class folks. No matter what, the investors,
Right.
the business class, they're going to keep making sure they get their profits. They're going to keep growing. And the only way they don't is when there's a massive economic downturn and everybody loses. And the people who bear the brunt of that are the working class folks, because they will always get theirs before the working class folks get ours, no matter what. And so you get people who work their whole lives. They work hard. They work all day, putting in hours of labor, and they're not getting a return on their labor. They're not getting a return on their labor in terms of their own income, and they're not getting a return in terms of how the value of their labor generates wealth for their company, and that company isn't being taxed, and that company's profits isn't being reinvested in the community to build the roads they drive on, to improve the schools their kids go to, or any of that stuff. Working class folks are getting shafted. They're not getting shafted by the left, except for when the left creates regulatory systems that don't take into account that the brunt of the cost in those regulatory systems land on the working class. We need to be fighting for both, and we need to be fighting pretty hard, not only for the environment. We need to be fighting for the changes that we make to protect the environment, to make sure that those costs don't fall on working class folks. And that's really hard to do because our entire state system, like you described, is designed to protect the wealth and investments of the business class. So we're fighting not only the state, we're fighting not only these industries, we're fighting the state as well.
So, well, the state basically was designed to protect the
industries,
the industry, the wealthy,
the property owners.
as James Madison put it, to protect the opulent from the minority of the opulent from the majority. I've got a book here called On Community Civil Disobedience in the Name of Sustainability, and it says, a surprising notion to some, but certainly not to those who actually crafted those laws, environmental and labor laws were never intended to protect the rights of workers or the natural environment. And I won't go through read all of this, but that labor laws were adopted to ensure an uninterrupted full production economy, rather than protecting the rights of workers. And environmental laws were adopted to protect people's right to use natural resources in ways that would not adversely affect other people or property, rather than to protect the rights of nature or ecosystems. So basically, everything that you described, capitalism, is no different than the landed gentry, serfs and fiefdoms and slavery. You provide the one with the capital, or the landowner, or the whatever, pays the worker as little as possible to get whatever they need done,
as much production
to create the work, the wealth, and then they keep the excess.
We should probably clarify for those of our audience who are listening and think of capitalism as, so I think a lot of us are taught or trained to think of capitalism as any kind of commerce, any kind of trade. If it's commerce, if it's trade, if it's the market, that's capitalism. So you think of everyone who's involved in business as capitalist. That's not capitalism. That's commerce, and commerce happens in any kind of economic system. Capitalism is that system where a group a person or a group of people or a corporation owns the means required to survive. Like, so if we need water to live, we need food to live, we need shelter to live, and somebody owns those things.
Right.
And then there's a whole group of people who don't own those things and cannot produce those things on their own because they don't own the property to extract the water, they don't own the property to grow the food, and they don't own the property in which to build shelter. So in order to get access to those basic survival needs, the people that don't own anything have to work for the people that do. And they trade the only commodity that we have, we trade our labor to get the means to actually survive. And we trade our labor to those people who don't actually have to work to survive because they own the things. We work for them, they don't work for us. And then those people then use the value of our labor, the profits of our labor, so they don't pay us as much as we work. That's how they make profit. We work, we earn money, and they take most of that money and they give us a portion of it, and then they take the rest of that money to provide for themselves and to create a state structure that protects their interests, that protects their property, that protects their control over the resources and things that the rest of us need to survive. That's capitalism. That's what capitalism is. And so when we talk about capitalism as just commerce, as in free market, as in free trade, it's not free for most of us. Most of us have to actually trade our lives, our bodies, our labor in order to get the means to survive. We can't go out and grow our own food. We can't go out and grab our own water. We can't go out and build our own shelter. We don't own the means and the resources to do that. So we don't own the means of production, and we don't own the resources to do that. The capitalists do. And that system of inequality is what we're criticizing and what we're calling the problem in this situation, where we have these wealthy, powerful property resource owning interests that are extracting the wealth and value of the resources in our rich area and not reinvesting it in our area. And those of us who actually work to produce the value out of the resources in our area, we don't get anywhere near the value of our labor to do that. That's capitalism, and that's what we're criticizing.
Exactly. So on that note, sustainability in Coos County is going to be a whole lot different than sustainability even in Curry County or Douglas County. We have a whole different set of dynamics, from water and natural resources just to politics and so forth. But after the war, the Second World War, there was this is a potential thing for people to consider. You're familiar with the Mondragon Corporation?
No.
M-O-N Dragon. Mondragon Corporation was founded by Father Arizmendi. This was like in, I guess it would have been like late 40s, early 1950s. He was a priest in the very poor Basque region of Spain, and he put together this organization. Five people was all it started with, and they started a little company, and they have now grown. I think Mondragon is now like the 7th or 10th largest corporation in Europe. It's wholly owned by the workers. It's basically a cooperative. So
how is it? I'll let you explain it first before I ask my question.
Let me get through it. So it's not just owned by the workers, but it is managed by the workers. In order to be on the board, you have to be an employee. And no employee can make, I think it's up to 8 now. No one employee can make more than 8 times the lowest paid employee. And so instead of throwing all these profits, to a CEO who's figured out a way to extract every thin dime out of everything to maximize the shareholders' dividends, you are the shareholder. And so they sell everything from baby food to washing machines to car parts to software, and the concept basically is that you buy in to the company. If you don't have enough money, the company will loan you the money. So you come in, you've got a concept. You want to be a car repair business, and you want to be able to manufacture some of your own parts for the cars that you repair. You become part of that overall umbrella. So insurance, healthcare, all kinds of things are funded by the profits going back into the company. It's held locally, and I'll give you an example. In the San Francisco Bay Area, they started something called the Arizmendi Bakery, and they had 2 or 3 things, and this was right during the housing crash when everybody was dying. They actually grew during that period. They wound up with 4 or 5 different locations, and it was on this Mondragon model where if you were on the board and you had say over how the business is being managed, safety features. Just imagine if, I can't think of his name now, but the guy who owned the mines that collapsed on the mine workers, just imagine if he actually worked in the mine and the different decisions he might have made during that time. But anyway, they formed this bakery. The people that work there are owners. They're all owners to one degree or another. They have a say on the board of directors, and the Arizmendi Bakery was actually growing when everybody else was shutting down, because they were using they're paying themselves comfortable salaries, but they weren't like raping everything out, on a quarterly basis, so that their credit rating with, S&P and so forth was so high. And anyway, there's several other examples of this Mondragon model.
Are they publicly traded, or are they not publicly traded, so they don't have to like? Yeah, see, that seems to be like one of the things that, at least in my understanding of how the economic system works, is once you have this publicly traded structure, then you have people who
you're
are
required by law to maximize the profits to the shareholder.
right.
By law.
Yeah, which means that the interests of your employees, the interests of your business is subject to somebody else who's not actually producing anything for you. Yeah, they gave money, but they didn't necessarily earn that money. Nobody's an investor isn't actually working, right? They don't actually have to do any labor. And a lot of these folks are inheriting a massive amounts of wealth, and they invest that wealth and they expect returns on that wealth, which they can then pass on to other people who didn't earn that wealth. Meanwhile, the people who are actually doing all the work are the ones earning the wealth, and they're not getting paid the wealth. So it sounds like this model where the people that do the work own the company.
Own the company, and they get paid. Yeah,
it's actually a much more sustainable system.
It's a democratic way to run a business, and in fact, Richard Wolff, which is where I learned about this in the first place, he's got an organization called Democracy at Work.info, I think. And he says you have to democratize the workplace, and we're all pro-democracy here. So, it's essentially the thing. Now, here's the other key component. It's not a key component, but something that is the person who kind of designed this was Karl Marx. And
No.
yeah. So
But that's a bad guy.
To some people, yeah.
To public investors.
So, yeah.
And independently wealthy capitalists.
Right, absolutely. And but if you go and you look at Mondragon partners with Microsoft, it partners with Apple. It does all it
so
just does business. It does plenty of business, but the profits from that business go back into I think they have they fund their own health insurance. They have a bank so that they can actually help new businesses that come into this cooperative. If they don't, they can help them. They have a very high success rate. Only like 4 or 5% of the new businesses fail. So, and it works. They're growing. They're still healthy. And
how do they self-regulate, or how do they manage the issues of ecological sustainability? Because that's one of the things that we struggle with because of the demands of public investors, of the shareholders of corporations that are doing extractive industries, is the difficulty of actually getting a company to abide by some kind of like ecologically sustainable ethics is, first of all, they don't want to cost their shareholders any money. So if they do anything that compromises their extractive profits, the people who bear the cost are the people that work for the company. So with a company like this, where the people who work for the company are the ones actually making the profit, do they individually and personally as a company have incentive to sacrifice some of their own income, because they're the ones that actually are the owners and investors in their own company, sacrifice their own income to actually protect ecological sustainability? Or does the state still need to step in and have some kind of regulatory authority over a company like that?
Well, I'm sure since they have to operate within the bounds of whatever country that they're operating in, that they're subject to whatever rules and so forth.
They are subject, but do they have to be? I was like, can a company like this be ecologically ethical, or is there still a role for a kind of public authority state system that says, okay, cool, you have this really just, really ethical economic model, but at the same time, your interests are still your own employees' profits, and you are still sacrificing public good to enrich your own employees, and we need to have some kind of regulatory authority that helps mitigate that. Is that what's happening, or do you know?
I honestly don't know how they manage that. And because Mondragon is basically hundreds of little companies that that have their own little specialty thing, I don't know. I'm fascinated to like start something like that. I mean, even running like K-Vision could be run under that kind of model at some. I mean, K-Vision couldn't because it's a nonprofit, but there's ways to run this democracy at work kind of model, and just make sure that you have certain ethics. Even in Oregon and California, they have something that's called a benevolent corporation, which enables the corporation to bypass certain legal requirements to maximize profits for the shareholder, as opposed to doing the right thing for the environment. But
so if you were to keep a company private, like not have it be a publicly traded company, You could, I don't know. Can you structure it however the heck you want then?
Well, sure.
Because that sounds like this kind of model would work as long as you didn't have it be publicly traded, and as soon as it becomes publicly traded, you lose it.
Well, I mean, once you couldn't publicly trade it because you have to be an employee.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. As soon as you have a public
to
trade
own
system,
shares.
you lose the structure.
So that would all go. Um, I suppose maybe some of the little companies within the larger framework may have made a decision to to exit and do that. I have no knowledge that that's true, but
Okay.
I suppose it's possible. But the concept basically is that they're keeping money local.
Right, yeah.
They're creating money locally, they're spending money locally, and because of that, they even have a hospital, I think. They have their own bank, which sounds pretty socialist, but they've got all these things that everybody contributes to, and yet they still earn a respectable living, and they own their business. They are owners, so they have that pride of ownership. And when they sign their name on the cardboard box, it isn't just because the overlords told them to, So, so anyway, to me, looking at Coos County and what's available to it, even just starting with that model where people shift from being employees of Walmart, and become owners of a business that imports some stuff, or they start working with people that are able to produce some of these goods, at least in the food department. Obviously, we're not going to be able to produce TVs around here anytime soon, and those are kind of toxic themselves, so for multiple reasons. But I think that if you take the time at some point to read the SDAT report, which was like 2010 or something, and look at these types of options like democracy at work and or the Mondragon model, and the cool thing is that you don't have to do it exactly the same way. You can tailor it to what works here, what works.
You just said works. Taylor. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, not that thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you obviously the one size fits all is not a approach that we want to take, but recognizing that these kinds of local ownership models and these kinds of employee ownership models can actually improve the economy of our area without expanding the environmental impact of our industry. And I think that's something we should actually encourage any of our audience to look into, especially if our audience is investing or if they are a property owner. That focusing on keeping our economic activity local actually helps everyone here, which means that obviously you don't want to be just operating vacation rentals and things like that. Yeah, it makes money for you, but it costs the rest of us. It does. And we want to, a lot of folks, the lower income you have, the less economic opportunity and liberty you have to choose where you shop, to choose what you can buy. But the higher you are in income, the more economic liberty you have more economic responsibility to your community, your neighborhood, because you have the choices and you can make a choice to go shopping at a locally owned business, and support local farmers and things like that. That some people who are more low income might not have that liberty and opportunity. Right. But when you do that, even though it might cost you, and in that moment, it might cost you more out of your pocket, that you're part of a community, and that money stays in this community. It circulates in this community longer than if you were to go to a business that isn't locally owned. That money gets that leaves this community altogether. And when money stays in this community, we're all richer, all of us. Individually, it cost you a little bit more, but collectively, it didn't. Collectively, it improved your quality of life. You improved your community, and improves all of our community. So we do want to encourage not only local ownership, we want to encourage local business economies. And honestly, like, I know, we've had some conversation about the political interests of certain local businesses and things like that. And you gotta, obviously you're gonna make decisions with your money about where your conscience and ethics are. But sometimes I think that if I know a business has a very different political alignment than me, but I know they're locally owned, sometimes the economic value that purchase makes and that business relationship makes is worth it. It's worth going to that company. So I think that when we start recognizing that our local interests, our community interests, and the needs of our people, at times, and depending on the particular kind of case, obviously civil rights is non-negotiable, but certain issues, it's like we can set those differences aside and we can work towards our community's betterment and economic viability and success.
So then the issue is, okay, we have some options that are worth discussing. In fact, you can get a model for how to create a cooperative work environment, like, by cooperative, I mean like a co-op. I think I should have checked on this beforehand, but I'm pretty sure you can pull down some sample, what do you call those things? Bylaws, for example, if you form a business model using this. I think you can get them from democracyatwork.info, but if not, they're available because I've read them before. But so we can do that, but we need to start engaging, getting the community to come together and say, okay, we can identify different problems, and I've only named a few. There's a lot more, but we do have an enormous trade imbalance here. So we've got to stop importing more goods than we export, because when we import, we export our dollars.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of value, our dollars.
So one of the ways we can stop exporting our dollars is shopping local. It won't entirely stop the export of our money, but it'll allow it to circulate here longer before it leaves. And in that time that it circulates, maybe more dollars are coming in from some of our local industries.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I don't know exactly how we can go about encouraging those community conversations. There was a tremendous amount of community buy-in when the SDAT report came out. People were pumped and ready to start having these town halls and getting together. But the local oligarchs didn't like it. And it just died on the vine, which is really unfortunate. There were people at the college that were all into it. I think it might be possible to initiate some of these meetings, conversations, by taking advantage of, like, maybe SWAC would get involved again. It's been a while, so you'd have to remind everybody what we're talking about. But this kind of dialogue has to be had, and it'll obviously take more than 2 or 3 brilliant minds. It's going to take like a whole bunch of people with their different experiences who know what the county is capable of, and again, I think it ultimately will be a slow transition, but communities have done that. Like even Bellingham Washington did a big buy local thing. I mean, I think it was and maybe still is pretty successful. You know, there are people, there are movements that you can kind of keep going. I think it takes branding, takes cute little logos and bumper stickers and constantly in your face type stuff. But you know, those are things that would be great to get people involved who want to get together and have a conversation about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's just the way economies work, the just local circulation of value of money is automatically going to enrich our community. But the other thing about it is, you know, local business owners, you know, you hope that those business owners have more than just the interest in their own wealth. And I know there are business owners here that they're very self-interested. They're not, you know, they're not great. But then there are business owners here who actually do want not only their own economic enrichment, but they want the economic enrichment and vitality of the whole community. And if you can find those folks, and you can find, and then they can be, you know, platform, you know, them, and give them a mouthpiece for inspiring and encouraging their fellow business owners to be invested, not just economically invested, but to be invested in terms of, you know, culturally invested, ethically invested, socially invested in our local community. You can create a culture that encourages people to shop local. People like patronizing businesses of their friends, of people they trust, of people that they know have their interests in mind. And if you can cultivate that, if you're a business owner or property owner, you can cultivate that kind of ethic, then your customers will know that. Your community will know that, and will want to patronize your business too. So and then when you get those business owners who have a reputation for being extremely selfish and greedy, like, people know that, and we avoid those businesses.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are a few.
I want to give a shout out, like, just before we go, I want to give a shout out to this relatively new local business called the Crypt Gaming. The Crypt Gaming, I don't really know the owners that well, but what little I do know is that they are really interested in the community. They're really interested in providing with their business a place for people to be, and to be safe, and to have fun, and so just giving it a little shout. I wasn't paid. It wasn't like I've just been there a few times. I've been there a few times, and it's a good business, a good vibe, and it feels like the owners there actually are interested in more than just making money. They actually want to be part of, you know, build a community identity here. So just gonna give a little shout out to Crypt Gaming without permission or anything like that. I hope they don't mind.
Oh no, I think that's great. I think we should do more of that for sure. Somebody just I probably shouldn't read it on out loud, but somebody just commented on my feckless leadership.
Okay.
So they commented on Geddry. So
okay. Well, let's wrap up the show. I think we could talk more about sustainability in the future. I think there's more different more areas to cover with that. And we tended to focus on economic sustainability, but touch briefly on ecological sustainability and things like that. And I think we should touch more on ecological sustainability. We have a really, you know, naturally rich area that in and of its own right has value, independent of whether or not it produces economic value for our community.
Whether it's a 2x4 or not.
It's a place where people and creatures and, you know, things live. And that has value. And it's not a monetized kind of value that it has, but it should still nevertheless be treasured. And I think we should talk about that sometime.
That's a whole cultural change too, especially when you live in an area that is resource dependent, resource extraction dependent. Getting people to suddenly look at that forest and say, man, that's cool.
Yeah,
you know,
and to
and it's
recognize that
cool just as it is. Yeah.
it's not for us.
Ecotourism or something. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's
yeah.
not for us. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
we're
A
for
lot of
it.
little families
Um,
live there. A lot of little families
mhm.
live in that forest. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, awesome. I think we'll wrap it up. And I had fun. And I'm glad you're back. We missed you. And, and, and mostly just envious. But
Yeah. Well, I'll let you know when I'm
I,
going back to Iceland.
yeah, yeah. I wouldn't mind going. Oh, but I do have some news. I think I'm going to be a grandma again.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, like 9 months from now. That's very close. So, yeah. All right. I will talk with you soon.
Okay.
And thank you, everybody. And hopefully you
Mhm.
enjoyed the show. Thanks.
Yeah. Take care.